Good evening. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to offer up a prayer this evening? Okay. Let's stand for the prayer, followed by the pledge, please.
Our Father God, we just thank you so much for the opportunity to come this evening, Lord, to be able to look at the resources that you have given us and to be good stewards of the finances that you have entrusted us with. God, we just ask that you give us clarity of mind and that, Lord, you will guide us, help us to make good decisions, Lord, and to listen carefully and for there to be clear communication. God, we just thank you for all that you do for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening and welcome to the April 8th, 2019 School Board Workshop. Items for individual consideration, 2.1, School-Based Cost Analysis. Dr. Pickles?
Actually, 2.1 and 2.2 will be combined together, and Mr. Copeland has provided a PDF, and I will ask Mr. Stallnacker to pull it up on the screen, and then Mr. Copeland can go over his documents for you, so if you'll turn around. Walter, there's a microphone there if you'd rather use that one.
Good afternoon, everyone.
No, I don't think you're on.
Can you hear me? Check. Still nothing.
Can you turn the sound up? Because it's on. The speakers aren't working. We will just have to talk louder.
I will talk loud. As we're working towards reaching out and getting preliminary numbers pulled together for our projected 2019 and 2019-20 year, we've taken some projections. We've taken what the state has sent us on the proposed funding, and we've also worked to identify areas of savings to our current budget amount that we see coming in the 1920 year. And I want to go through and share some of this. And again, it's early in the budgeting process for next year, so these are preliminary numbers. And Sam, if you'll go ahead and move to the first page. This is a basic summary right here of what we were looking at in preparing the preliminary budget for the 1920 year. And on our FTE forecast, our total FTE we forecasted is 2,558. And if you look at the bullet points, it's an overall decrease of 10.83 FTE over our current 2018 third calc numbers. The district retained FTE is budgeted at a 22.16 FTE decrease over our current third calc numbers. Charter FTE numbers for next year's projections are budgeted to be up 22.76 FTE. On our state funding, the Florida Education Financing Program, our projected state and local funding through the preliminary documents that we've gotten from the House bill is $19,724,470. This is the general fund money. It's an overall increase of $14,763 over our current state funding that we're under right now. So not much of a change. District retained FEFP funding, and when I say district retained, I mean that's net of what we have to pass along to the charters. So that's what we operate off of. It's a small decrease from where we are right now, around $7,195 is projected. And the proposed base funding in this House bill is 0.91% per FTE full-time student, 0.91% over our current number. So very little increase that we're looking at. That's not uncommon. The same thing last year. And that base rate is $4,242.76 as compared to $4,204 at current. We're gonna move to our expenditure budget in a minute, but what we did is we took our current budget our revised budget that we're under. We looked out and we adjusted our numbers, projecting any cost increases or cost decreases we are fairly certain of for this coming year. In doing that, we have identified what we feel comfortable in expenditure decreases of around $600,000 over our current revised budget amount. I'm going to share those with y'all in just a minute, but this right here, I don't know if you can make it a little bit bigger. What this is a summary by school level of the the state funding that we're working off of in this projection. And got the Madison County High School. We've budgeted 514 FTE versus 498.50. We're projecting them to be up a little bit, the central school to be down a little bit. Again, these are projections, but we spent a lot of time, Ms. Hill, myself, trying to be conservative, but working to be as accurate in our forecast as we can get. The central school's down. We have projected 35. Again, keep in mind that this projection is what we're funded off of the first part of next year. It will adjust in the third calc next year, which comes October through December. Remember last year we had a huge decrease, a lot of students left. We've tried to really get granular in this projection here and be accurate but be conservative. We have Greenville projected to be up 8 FTE, Lee projected to be down 17, Pinetta projected to be up, and again, just the school, what's called the traditional schools, which is our schools, not the charters, not the DJJ, we're projected to be down 22.16 FTE for the first portion of of the 2019-20 year. The school level funding is also broken out here to the right, and you can see the estimated state funding as an allocation to each school. High school's up a little, their FTE's projected to be up. Central school's down. Greenville, we have it up. Lee is down, again, their FTE we're projecting to be down. Pinetta's up. And district total FEFP revenue that we're projecting is right in line with what we're under right now. And again, these are detailed worksheets that come from the state, and so we take it and we break it out by school. It's not going to be exact. It should be pretty close, and that's what we're projecting at the school level. If you go to page 4, this right here is a more detailed summary of those total calculations I just went through by school. This takes you through the actual the FEFP funding documents that the state provides us, and I have it broken down by school, and you can see the base funding. There's categorical funding. And I summarize this also. The lines are, I mean, there's tons of stuff. But again, overall, for the district, we're projecting $19,724,470 in total state funding, state and local Florida Education Finance Program funding. Pardon me? Oh, 19 million. I apologize. No, I didn't. Oh, gosh. No, absolutely. Sorry about that. If you, Sam, if you'll go down to the next one. I just wanted to share, this is just somewhat of a summary of the history from 2009 to 2018, this past fiscal year. And what it is, it just kind of shows the orange line at the top. That is the district's FTE that we have, not charter, that's what we're operating off of. And you see in 2009, we're at 2,733. You come to 2013, it's 2,599. 2014, it's 2,422. That's when one of the charter schools kicked in. 2015, 2,455. 16, it's down, 2,384. 17, 2,194. And the final numbers for 2018 were 2,212. So you can see that we have to tighten our belts, and we've just seen a steady decline of sorts in our funding that we retain here at the district. If you look in the last, the numbers at the bottom are by year, and that's in thousands. 2009, you see there was a deficit of 685,000, 174, 233. And then you come over here, the past 2 years, we have had a slight increase in our unrestricted funds. You'll see 127,000 for the 217 year, and $14,000 for this past year. Sam, can you go to the next one? This right here is just a quick summary of our district schools, the activity through March of this year. We have the state funding allocated to the schools, the revenues per student, the total expenditures by object code, the expenses per student. If you'll scroll down just a tad, Sam, please. So this kind of gives you a snapshot of, you know, we have schools, you know, there is a discrepancy in cost per student. And you see here anywhere from, and this is just the general fund allocation, anywhere from 7,000 or from 8,263 at the highest cost per student, and 4,000 or $6,013 is the lowest. And it also has our year-to-date activity. Each school is operating pretty good within the budget right now. We're 75% through the year, and we just hope we can continue to maintain. This is the exact same thing you were looking at school level, but this is by function code in the expenditures. So this breaks the expenditure lines out a little more than the other. You see instruction, pupil services, and it goes on down. But again, these are the same totals by school. We're just breaking out the expenditures in a different format so we can see the difference between locations.
Let me stop you for a minute,
Yeah.
Mr. Copeland. You just said that each school is operating within the budget. Does that mean that each school is fiscally sound? I mean,
well, what we're operating, keep in mind that our budget, after we had to do our budget revisions, you know, we're budgeting a hefty deficit through the end of the year. So we're operating within that adjusted budget, which is not necessary. I mean, we had no choice but to make the revisions when we had the calculation decrease. That's a good question. They're operating within a budget that I hate that we have, if you understand. But again, we're going to go through some projected savings in the next few slides, and the savings that we have looked at, that we have identified right now for next year, I have them on the district level right now. We haven't been able to carve them out between schools at this point, but they will be, the majority of them. So, all right.
thank you.
This right here is just to get more information, to look at school level activities. This right here is from our cost reports. These are our numbers we send into the state. They compile, they present information that's available to the public and on the web. And this goes from 17, 18 all the way back to 2014. And it gives you a snapshot each year of what the schools have had in their student funding. We have it broken down by total expenses per student and per school We also have it broken down by total expenses, just the general fund, by school, by student. You can see it just kind of identifies who's a little more costly than the other ones. Right here is a budget summary of what we are projecting for early on. Again, this is very preliminary, but this is what we identified for the 19-20 year. And right here, if you see the 2019-20 projected district budget, that's the revenues we looked at a minute ago from the state. We also have the local revenue that we have is added in there. So that's why the number's 20,821,000 and some change, not the 19 million. The 19 is just the state funding. Scroll over to there's a column on the right side. We have to receive the charter money and we turn around and pay it out less an admin fee. So we're taking that out in that middle column. You'll see what we're projecting to pay out to the charters. And scroll on down just a little bit. But right there. Our budget, before we identify any of these mitigating items for 19-20, we're looking at a $673,000 or $673,882 deficit in our general fund operations, meaning there's more going out than coming in. If you see right here where we have recast items, these are items right here that we've identified working within the admin group and others. These are areas that we see change for next year. Scroll to the right a little bit, please, Sam. Okay, right there. We have the projected step increases. Just the general fund portion is projected around 200,000. That's a negative, you'll see. That's a detriment. That's an additional deficit to the 673. These other items you see listed are items of savings that we're projecting next year over our current budget. Instructional material purchases. I've worked with Ms. Hill. We feel like we can still provide everything everyone needs and more and cut our expenditures for this next year by $100,000. Let me see. Scroll to the left a little. Maybe I can see it. Also, we had talked about this earlier, and the board has done a good job. They have a budget themselves, travel, periodicals, things like that. We're going to reduce that in the next year. They're operating well below what was typically budgeted. And I'm projecting right now a $35,000 increase from that reduction. We've talked about the health insurance premiums. Our health insurance renews in October. So when we're projecting a savings, we will get 75% of the year, since it's we renew 3 months into the fiscal year. I'm using from talking with our brokers back and forth, our broker, a figure of $200,000 to just the general fund. There will be other savings that will be passed along to the food service and the other grant funds that also fund and pay for these premiums. what we have here is we have some position staffing changes that have been made that will be overall savings to the general fund budget as we go into next year. And just real quick, we've eliminated a secretary position out here or in the district office and moved them to food service. That's going to be a savings to the general fund. We're not replacing that position in the general fund. Miss Cheryl Alderman, who's been in my department or our department for years, she is retiring. She's great, but she's earned her stripes. So we're going to have a savings there. We're looking at outsource options on the benefit side. And but anyway, we're projecting an overall decrease of around $61,000 because of some projected moves or outsourcing that we're looking at. We also, going forward into next year, we have a retirement of a principal, and we have I think an AP position that is not going to be. And with the combination of those two items, we should see a substantial savings. We have some other positions cut here, not cut, a lot. Some of them are people have resigned. Again, a meeting or two ago, looking at our FTE forecast by school, Mr. Stallnaker, there was some staff allocation changes, and we tried to identify those. And scroll to the right a little bit, Sam. And we've tried to identify those and drop in an estimate of what the net savings will be to the district's general fund next year, and that includes the benefits cost too. So the column there on the right is the $602,200 that we feel like we're confident in that we're going to be able to reduce our expenditures next year over our current level. And again, I hope we can do more than that, but these are projections, and we didn't put anything on here that we weren't pretty darn confident in that was going to happen. But I do want everyone to know I can't, this is not an audited, this is our best effort with the knowledge we have right now and what we see coming next year. This is our best effort to identify the net change that we feel will be made to the expenditure budget in the coming year. Now, we're going to continue to identify stuff as we move through the year, as we work towards our final budget. And some of those areas we identify may be additional cost to us, but we may identify additional savings also. So we're working to do that. And Sam, if you scroll down just a little bit. On going. And basically what I did is we want to keep our fund balance right now is projected to be somewhere between 3.2 and 3.5%. This is what needs to be done based on our current on these numbers to keep our projected fund balance at 3.5% for the 2019-20 year end. That being said, you see the yellow line there? That's additional savings or additional revenue, if we could find a way to pick up some additional revenue that we're going to need over and above these numbers here to keep us at the 3.5. So we're, again, we have a lot more digging to do, a lot more work to do, but these are the items as of today that we feel like we can use to reduce the expenditures. So, Sam, I don't know if there's another. I think that's it. Yeah. No, well, I got those included. Yeah. So we're going to get much more detailed, much more formal, but right now, this is a snapshot of the detail. And we'll, again, we're all working to identify areas of savings, identify areas of increased revenue that may be out there. And that's it in a nutshell.
Any questions for Mr. Copeland?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Gibson, I have a question. Mr. Copeland, on where it says the retirement of the principal and elimination of the AP position, the AP would generate savings, but unless you're not going to replace the principal, how is that going to be generating savings?
What, Mr. Alford, we were projecting the number one, like you said, the AP savings, but what we were projecting is likely that the replacement for the retiring principal would come in at a lower pay scale than the principal that's retiring right now. I don't know that. I mean, we have to go through the steps in the hiring, advertising process, and all that. But it's likely that that's the case. And keep in mind that we have about 23 to 25% in benefit cost for our payroll, and that's included in there too. And Mr. Alford, as we move toward the final budget process, we'll get very finite on these numbers.
But you're saying that we need to make $122,000 worth of additional cuts to get to the 3.5% fund balance.
That's right. Again, based on these numbers that we have through today.
That is actually one of my questions for 2.6 is to know what the board's desire is for a goal of a fund balance. And then in what time frame you need to get there. Do you want to be there July? The speakers are not working. So what is your desired fund balance goal? Do you want to be at 3.5? Do you want to be at 5%?
I'm not comfortable right now.
2020 school year you're talking?
Yes, ma'am.
I would be comfortable for the 1920 school year from where we're coming to where we're going for at least 4.
Definitely, because I feel like we're living on the edge right now, and I don't feel comfortable.
Policy, our school board policy is 5, but that's a big jump in 1 year. If we could get to 4 this year and then work on the following year, bringing it on up to the 5.
Well, Mr. Oliva stated we didn't have to reach it today or tomorrow, but we've got to get there, and definitely 4%.
Can I
Go ahead.
Interject again? Yeah, and again, we're a $25 million organization, give or take a little bit, with our grant funds, our food service, and everything involved. And it's when you're projecting something that large, you're going to be off. I could be off too. It could be I don't want to be operating on the edge.
We don't either.
And
No.
I want you to understand, I can't promise you anything about these projections except that they'll be different when they're finalized. And but I don't think we've missed we've spent a lot of time on it and really got granular on it. So we'll adjust it as we move forward.
If we're gonna need the, 122,984 to get us to 3.5, how much more would we need to cut to get us to the 4? That's
Roughly $75,000 would get you about 0.5% based on the revenue dollars that we have. That's a good number to look at.
So 75 added to the 123 basically.
Yeah.
So you're talking $200,000.
And again, we have we may have we have the another calc coming up right now that's done that will be funded on. We may have a slight FTE increase for the remaining part of the year. I sure don't want to bank on that for next year. So there are areas that, and Ms. Hill, I know y'all.
I'd like to ask Ms. Hill something about the decrease, the $100,000 in instructional materials. If you could just give us a little.
Okay. As you know, the Florida standards have had the cycle for adopting textbooks has been off for about 2 years. And so what the DOE worked on with these textbook companies was what they called gap plans. And these gap plans were normally when you order textbooks, you order them for, you adopt them and you order them for like a 5 or 6 year cycle. And so you pay for them the first year, and then each year you can order and get the consumables free. And that's for the life of the contract, which is usually 5 or 6 years. Because the cycle is off, DOE worked with the companies to put together some gap products. And that's to fill in the gap. And so this year we had to purchase these gap materials, but they were for a 3-year period. So that's gotten us, it's money up front this year that we had to pay, but now we have 2 more years of free materials.
Okay, now was that after the 5 years expired?
Yes, ma'am.
So we're in the gap right now then?
We are. We are. And so like our ELA materials, we use Journeys as our K-5 program. We were able to get, for them it was a 2-year gap. And then for College Board, which is our 6 to 12 ELA materials, we got a 3-year gap purchase. And so we will not have to purchase the materials for ELA because we purchased them this year, and that was basically K to 12. So that's going to save us from what we did purchase this year, because we had to pay for that this year, and so we had to dip into our supplemental academic instruction fund to be able to purchase those.
Now you won't have to purchase any consumables then, or you still would have to do that, right?
For ELA, but they will be free.
Oh, they're going to be free.
They will be free.
Good.
So we won't have to spend any money on ELA. Plus, this year, because the governor decided he wanted to review the standards, we won't be purchasing a new curriculum. Like this past year with science, and so we had to purchase, all new science books. But this year we will not have to purchase new instructional materials. We'll just keep using what we've got.
Thank you. That's good news.
Yes.
I just want to say to Ms. Hill, I appreciate what you've done with this, but again, if you truly think that students need a curriculum, me sitting here as a board member, I want you to come to us and not feel like it has to be on this cut to save money.
Okay.
We do not need to shortchange the classroom to save jobs.
Definitely.
I mean, if we need to have the kids at the forefront of this. And if we need a program, then you
Okay.
need to come to us and say we need it, and we're gonna have to do what we have to do.
Okay.
But at the same rate, if they're
Right.
not using those supplementals, let's not continue to pay for
Right.
them.
No,
Right, we've talked
absolutely,
about
but
that
I
already.
just
Right,
don't
and
wanna-
we did I kind of did a little study, a return on investment study. And I even did a survey of all the teachers and, got back basically from two different angles, what they feel like is most important. There are some things that they said, I know we've had this the last 4 or 5 years, but we really don't use this to the extent that we pay for it. So, and I do think, based on what I worked on, we will be able to keep most of what we have, except those things where the teachers did say, no, we can do without that.
I just don't want instruction to be harmed or
Thank you.
curriculum due to
Thank you.
us trying to come up
Yeah.
with.
Well, the
money.
students are number one.
Right,
I mean,
that's our main priority, and again, we can find the money other places in the classroom.
Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Hill.
Those are items 2.1 and 2.2.
Okay, 2.3, long-term planning committee suggestions. Dr.
In your board docs, you have the committee recommendations, and Mr. Williams and committee members, several committee members are here to go over those recommendations and provide more insight and thought for why they came up with the recommendations. So, Mr. Williams, would you like to address the podium?
As far as I'm concerned, I think that I would prefer for me to let the document pretty much speak as it does, and if there are any specific questions that the board would have for the particular committee members, then we would proceed that way. I don't think it's necessary to go through it.
The very first one, restructure, reconfiguration. It has been discussion. It was made by recommendation of the committee to restructure the outlying schools, and I think we need to take a look at that because Greenville is lower in numbers. By moving the 6th grade back there would increase their numbers and put them closer to being where their cost per student is less. I don't know that Pinetta has the room for the 6th grade, nor if Lee does. At one time, Ms. Brown said that she did have room, so I don't know where that stands. But I do think that is something that we should look at and receive guidance from DOE, whether they're going to allow the transition.
So on that note, where are we in that part of the process?
What you would do is you would have to submit for a new school number, and what you're in essence doing is going to roll up those 22 children is what you'll do. Now, it was pointed out to Ms. Gibson and myself is they take into consideration lots of things. They take into consideration why you're doing it. They look at school grades. They also are going to look at the capacity, the current capacity at Central, and you're going to be lowering that capacity. So currently, we are projecting, I have to go back, 950, and so we're now going to lower it by 22 more. If we push Pinetta or Lee, their students, roll their students up, we're going to lower it roughly by 50 kids, 75 kids. Because that's 24 at Lee, their 5th grade. So roughly by 50 kids, and then 22 to roll up those kids. So they will question why you're doing it, and then they also look at the school grades. So there's a combination of factors that they consider and why you're applying for a school number. And that's what, in essence, you would be doing.
Would
The
you
other,
need to submit that would be considering moving the district office to the central school? Would there be space if the kids went back to the other schools?
6th and 7th and 8th are in 2 wings, and so all of those would have to go back, or at least out of the 1 wing.
Madam Chair.
Well,
Yes, sir.
had discussed the 7th and 8th graders going to the high school.
Same
This-
thing
why
applies
don't
to everything.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe we need to go over it.
Under the actual reconfiguration and restructure, I was expecting a specific question, but there was more commentary related to what the process was. And so what Andy Barnes is here, and what Andy would like to actually spend some time talking to you for a few minutes about that actually reconfiguration and restructuring, because, you know, he was very helpful to us in our process. And so here again, I think it would be great if you heard from him.
Oh,
that'd be great.
good. Thank you.
Thank y'all for the opportunity to talk to y'all tonight. So let me put a little bit of this in context. Mr. Williams did a good job leading our committee. We started out with a brainstorming session with about 64 different suggestions. One of those suggestions was actually to consolidate all the outlying schools into the central school. When the committee tried to check for consensus on that, consensus was not met. The only thing that the committee came to consensus on was actually, one of the suggestions was for Greenville to be raised to the 8th grade. And at that point, that was the only thing that the committee came to consensus on. And so the thing that was obvious and the thing that was missing most is the fact that the committee did not think that the outlying schools should be shut down. If anything, it was an activity to try and save one of the outlying schools that was in most jeopardy. So in light of that, we opened discussion around, okay, so how do we make the outlying schools more sustainable? And then how do we keep the central school and the high school also increase their capacity and gain efficiencies there? So the way that we did that, or the way that the strategy that we came up with, was basically a pre-K to 6 in all the outlying schools, as well as in Madison. So if you remember, Madison had a primary school, and then you had Lee, Greenville, and Pinetta, K to 8 actually. Kind of going back to that same model. So the school numbers would actually stay the same. They would basically all be K to 6 schools. And then the other part of the strategy, which one of the committee members pointed out, is that teacher certifications run K to 6 and 7 to 12. So then to take the 7th and 8th grade that's currently at Central and move them to the high school, which the high school has capacity for, would actually allow at that point basically for Central to be a K to 6 school. It could operate one side. Central, if I remember correctly, it operates off of a central chiller plant for the gym, the cafeteria, and the central core of the school, the buildings that run down the middle. And then each wing actually runs off of separate independent split units for AC. So you could in effect shut down each of those buildings like you would a Pinetta or a Greenville. Therefore, you'd save a couple of buildings as far as utilities if that's what you ended up doing. So you gain some. So you're able to gain some efficiencies by doing that, and also relocating the county office. So you'd obviously gain some efficiencies here. As far as being able to vacate the county office, selling, and all those things, you know, I know that there's DEP issues and things like that with diesel from when I was here. So I know that's a concern. I don't know necessarily this building is really worth selling, but you would gain some efficiency by being in a more efficient building like Central versus being here, where there's no insulation underneath the floors. There's probably very little insulation in the attic and in the exterior walls and so on. So there are some opportunities there. And, you know, and I hate to even bring this up, but Central has been, one of the other things that kind of finalized this, I think, for the committee, is that for some reason, the outlying schools try to avoid Central. When it comes to middle school, a lot of them, and Ms. Bars, I hope you don't mind me using your name. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a waiting list of people from Pinetta, Lee, and Pinetta and Lee trying to get into the charter school, trying to avoid their children going to Central. So, and I hate to even say that, because I fought for years trying to build Central up, and I have kids that all went through Central and kids that have gone through the high school, and they've all had wonderful experiences. But that's just kind of where we are. So then we thought about it from a competitive standpoint too, as far as competing for students with the charter schools and so on. And that was kind of the basically what we settled on. So again, this didn't happen because this was trying to run contrary to any recommendations or contrary to anything that has been presented to y'all through fads or anything like that. It was really just knowing our community, knowing what would be accepted, and seeing what maybe some other opportunities are to try and embrace that. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Yep. Excuse me. Thank you.
Questions. I'm sorry.
Yes, let me ask any questions for Mr. Barnes. Excuse me.
No, I appreciate all that you did on this, serving on this committee. I do think that it's something that we need to look at to try to save all of our schools, because again, once one school goes, my fear is that the others are going to go too. It's going to be a chain reaction, and once you start that, you're not going to be able to stop it.
Honestly, that never came up in our conversation. We didn't make this decision out of a fear we made it more or less because we felt like this would be the strongest opportunity for them to succeed.
And I agree with you. It is the strongest opportunity, but in the reality, as a board member, my fear is once, okay, say if Greenville goes, then Pinetta's will go and Lee's will go, and we're going to have a chain reaction. And the minute that happens, a charter company is going to be here the next day saying, I want the keys to the building.
And they're eligible to take them.
And they're eligible to take them. And at that point, not only have we lost the school, the community's lost their school, we've lost 500 students who are between Lee, Pinetta, and Greenville. And I think that would be a snowball to something we would not be able to stop.
We didn't pretend to have a crystal ball, so we kind of right. But I mean, we tried not to speculate. We tried to basically come back to just what we knew to be true among all the committee members.
But again, it makes a lot of sense. The one, Ms. Hill had concerns that moving the 7th and 8th grade and 6th from Central would lower it to an F, based upon the scores. The middle school, I guess, is really helping the school to keep its grade. We're having, the high school is having a hard time in that being efficient with having classes filled, and moving the 7th and 8th grade there would allow high school teachers who hold that certification be able to have filled classes, which would in turn help us be more efficient and operate more efficient. And again, like I said the last meeting, we have to make sure that Central's K through 2 is addressed with whatever issues are there, that we're not expecting an F if you pull out the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade.
And
but I do think from an instructional side and an efficient side, it would be very efficient to move the high schoolers, the 7th and 8th, to the high school. It would alleviate the stigma that people have about going to Central, because the people there will be the people who are zoned from there, who want to be there. Your outline school students, they're the ones who are trying to avoid it. I mean, that's the reality of it. I've been on the board for many years, and that's been the reality since it opened, for whatever reason. And I do think it would be a way where we could do that. Again, we have to be realistic that if we do move it and Central becomes an F, then we have that to contend with. But I do think it's something that we need to have the conversation and look at, not just say, oh, we're going to have to ask the DOE for a number. I mean, we need to do what we need to do.
Well, and I would, if I could be recognized.
Go ahead.
Ms. Hill brought that concern to me, and that is and I lived through that concern as well. We've always known that, unfortunately, what carries Central a lot of times is the middle school, the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. What drives a school grade is student performance. If the student performance is not in K to 5 at Central is not performing, you hate to cover that up with students that are performing. Mm-hmm. So, exactly. And I know, believe me, we've fought. I hope I'm not making your job sound a lot easier than what it is. I know that's a near impossible. It's very difficult to overcome that. But at the same time, that's the students probably deserve a very fair
They do.
shake
I agree with you totally.
in performance.
We don't need to be covering it up. We need to be getting better for those children in the elementary levels at Central School that they achieve student achievement, not covering up.
Where the issue comes in, and now in the middle school world with all the certifications they can get and advanced classes they could take, they take those and do well in them, and we get a lot of bonus points, which helps our grade. And it's great to have the bonus points, but it's very misleading in our overall grade. The sad thing about it, and we should not. I mean, if we're afraid that it's going to be an F, then we need to put all of our resources into trying to remediate this issue where it's not that. I agree with what you're saying. I mean,
my concern is taking the 7th and 8th graders to the high school, because you will be taking 11 and 12-year-old children and putting them with 18, 19, and 20-year-old people. And how are you going to separate at the high school? How are you going to separate those students? You know, there's different buildings at the Central School. Like, if you know, you can hold this one and it suits for itself. But the high school is one building. How are you going to keep those young kids away from the adults, pretty much, at the high school?
Well, actually, I taught in a school that was K through 12. It's not unusual at all to have high school begin at 7th grade.
I mean, me personally, I wouldn't want my 11, 12-year-old daughter to the high school where 18 and 19-year-old.
Excuse me, audience, thank you.
18 and 19-year-old. But if it was possible that you could separate them, like they do in Hamilton County, where you have your one side for the 7th and 8th graders, and then you have the other side for the high school students, that would be perfectly fine. But that is not what we have in Madison County. We have one big building. That would mean that any given day, a 19-year-old boy might have access to a young girl, or a 19-year-old girl might have access to a young boy. I just don't think that would be a good thing.
One thing about it to look at, there's really no different now than if you have a 5th grader who's been retained a couple times, could be way older than a typical 5th grader in 5th grade.
But I don't think there's no
there with the first grade.
But there is no 19-year-old students in the Central School or the Greenville School or the Pinetta School or the Lee School. There is no 19-year-old boys or girls in those particular schools.
Again, at that
I don't care how many times they've been retained.
But at that point, we would hope that
I don't want to hope, because if an incident happens with a child, it's gonna be damaging to that student for the rest of their life.
Incidents that happen at Central
But I don't want to look.
I
want to save each and every one, not one. I mean, not a bunch. I want to save each and every one. Every student means something to me. So I'm looking at all the students, not just a certain few. And I don't want to go on a hope and a prayer when I got access right here, right now, with this board to put a stop to it. Let's hope. I don't hope I get shot when I walk out that door, but it's a possibility. But we got to look at things.
But again, if the board were to choose to do that, then at that point,
if you want to put the 6th grades back to the outline schools,
excuse me, Mr. Alfred is speaking.
If the board chose.
Okay, when he interrupts me, you need to stop him.
Mr. Alfred,
he does that a lot. Now I was talking about the high schools. I'm not Miss Carroll. I'm Miss Chairman. You know how I am. I'm a very cool person. But when I'm talking, I have been interrupted many a times on this board, and I have just as much right as everybody up here to speak.
Okay, you do. We agree. All right, but let's stop this right now, please. Mr. Alfred, go ahead.
If it were to come to that, hopefully the principal in charge of the school would set up the school in such a way where it would be conducive for all who's there. And I appreciate this committee, their hard work in trying to think outside the box to help the district as best they can.
If it's the 6th grade students that be put back to the outlying schools, that is perfectly fine, because they're within the same age range. But putting the 7th and 8th graders at the high school, I don't think it's fair to our students.
All right, I'd like to thank Mr. Barnes and Mr. Williams and excuse me, okay. I'd like to thank Mr. Barnes and Mr. Williams and the entire long-range planning committee for what you've done. I can tell by what's the conversation that you have the community at heart, because each community is different and we all have different needs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Barnes.
Oh, did she want to speak?
I only wanted to ask why Andy was standing up there when people shared the discussion that we had on the committee, as I am a member of the committee, on the concerns about the capacity at Pinetta.
Okay, would you like to? Mr. Barnes?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear everything that Ms. Hubbard said.
Would you
mind repeating what you
There were some concerns addressed by the superintendent about the capacity. If we were to go to pre-K 6 at outlying schools, the capacity, especially at Pinetta. Remember, we had some discussion about the only additional students that would be at the school because the 5th grade will be moving up to the 6th grade, and they're already there. So the new students will be the pre-K students.
Yes.
And at one meeting, the superintendent addressed the capacity percentage of each school. Pinetta, I believe, was 88%, Lee 87%, and those are the two of concern. So if you remember that discussion.
I do roughly, and you know, there's a very specific reason why Mr. Williams worded our recommendation the way he did the first go-round, which is, you know, as far as we basically had a little over a month to come up with all this. So to work through all of the details and vet through all of this is, you know, that's kind of why I left it to you guys to say, okay, is this doable or is this not? And to really vet it fully. So at this point, that's kind of where we are. Now, I will say this, if Pinetta, for example, their capacity is 200. If they're at 88% capacity, that leaves roughly 24 spaces. 12% of 200 is 24. That leaves roughly 24 spaces. Your pre-K or kindergarten through 3 is operated at 1 to 18, and that would be your incoming group, possibly. So it looks like, on paper, and again, it's on paper. I mean, so how you actually do it is up to the board and the professionals that are here that have shown themselves to be very capable. On a side note, if I could take a little bit of liberty, I wanted to say what Mr. Copeland provided y'all tonight was excellent. Just having done it for so long, especially the last sheet in that paper where he broke down all the expenditures and everything, I think he made it very easy for y'all to interpret what was happening, where it was going, and I think that's exactly what you've needed, and I think that's a good starting place to work from. So I just want to take a little bit of liberty to do that. But as far as capacity goes, I mean, Lee obviously has capacity. I think their capacity was 240 when I was here, and I think they may have added a portable since, or maybe somewhere in that range. I'm not exactly sure.
We still have an empty portable.
So there's capacity in Lee. Obviously, there's capacity in Greenville. Pinetta's the one that's going to be a stretch, but based on 88% of 200, there's 24 seats there. How you configure them and arrange them will be up to the professionals at the school. So. And again, we're not here to try and tell the district how to do their job. We don't dig that deep into the details. We didn't have that kind of time frame. You give us 5 years and we may have a rock solid plan for you. We're going to answer every one of your questions, but that's just not the reality. So anyway, hopefully that gave some context.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes.
Thank you.
Talking about capacity, I've jotted down the numbers. The reconfiguration that you're discussing, the high school would be 719, capacity is 833. Central would back down to 701. Capacity is 1625. You need to keep that figure in the back of your head. Pinetta's capacity is 224. They would be at 240 if you rolled up. Lee's capacity is 253. They would roll up to a 222, and then Greenville would be 143, and their capacity is 268. In speaking of Central, one of the things in our last meeting with DOE, with the chancellor and the head of the Florida School Boards Association, one of the things that was pointed out when we were just discussing Ms. Gibson pointed out pushing the 6th grade back, it was pointed out you're going to lower the capacity of a school that's already under capacity. So you're going to take a school down to under 50%. So you just need to keep that in mind, even if you're going to push administration out there or not. You just need to keep that in mind. And you're going to push one school almost at capacity. Actually, one over and then 2 others at capacity.
Thank you for that information, Dr. Pickles. Mr. Williams? Did you want to continue, board? Do you feel like you would like Mr. Williams to continue
Please.
on?
Okay.
If you will.
We can go to the next heading.
Okay.
If there are any questions or comments.
I think the people at home would appreciate it too.
Okay.
And the audience.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Okay. Again, I won't reiterate what the document says. You all can look at it, and then if you have any specific questions about it, I'm sure committee members are ready to speak to those particular issues.
Any questions for Mr.
On
Williams?
the next heading?
Concerning the transportation, I have a concern. I mean, I do realize concerning the 2-mile radius for bus routes within the school. My concern out at Central is, and even at your outlying schools like at Lee and Pinetta, how are the students going to get there? Because I mean, I know there's a sidewalk from in town to out to Central, but even for them trying to get from the sidewalk up into the school would be very dangerous. And you know, in looking at it through the transportation, I don't know really how much that would be saving us. I mean, I don't know, that would be something we need to look at with the numbers. I mean, it concerns me with kids having to walk like that.
Especially when it's dark in the morning, you know,
Well,
definitely.
and here again, I want to reiterate something that Andy said. We didn't get that deep in the weeds because it was not our job to figure out how to tell you how to do it. What we did was we pointed out the different areas that we believed under the whole cost-cutting theme that was a way to save money.
Right.
Now, Mr. Copeland, I'm certain, should be able to give us some idea, give the board some idea relative to the amount of money that would be saved. We did have a conversation relative to the safety aspect of it, but here again, our job was not to get into the weeds on it and dig down into the details. Our job was simply to look at all the areas and make recommendations.
Because I would think that when we redid our bus stops back several years ago, that there's a central location that they're picking up in town, like 1 or 2 stops. So I don't know that it would really be that many like stops we're making. It just concerns me. The safety, but because again, if the school's entrance was somewhat in the center where kids could get in it some way, where they're not having to cross the main
And go up from the sidewalk, you got the hilltop.
Right.
It's probably about as far away from the 2 mile for Central.
Right.
But they are less than 2 miles, they're like 1.9.
Right.
You have all those kids walking, when they get to the school, they got to go from the sidewalk up to the school through the driveway.
Right.
Where all the cars are coming in and out. I mean, it's just a lot
And,
of
and,
safety.
and we even had some discussion, there was some short discussion about picking them up at the residences right across from the central school because they would have to cross 90 and have that whole issue with safety. So here again, though, it's great that you're having that discussion, but I certainly think that it's something that you ought to be having as a board relative to, you know, what your desire is. Here again, that's your recommendation. And recommendations are just that, they are recommendations. And you all have to weigh the value of what those recommendations are.
Yeah, I think the safety.
We do believe that you've heard us because you're discussing it. And that's what makes it valuable for us, that you're actually having a discussion about it.
Right, the safety of the kids getting to school and being at school is very important.
Right, right. And here again, I'm sure Mr. Copeland would be able to provide numbers to tell us how much, you know, that would save, and then this board has to decide whether that's something you want to do or not. You know, that's.
Mr. Copeland, could you just let us know how many stops the buses are making, like prior to the pickup? And I'm assuming it's like where Ms. Williamson said, that area until they get to the school, to give us an idea of what we're. And I know at your outline schools that. There's more parents who bring students. Again, the concern I have there, I mean, all of our schools are Title I schools. If a parent is poor and they maybe don't have a car or they're without gas, how are they going to get to school? And truancy is very important for students to be in school. And I mean, if parents are bringing kids, then that's great, but it's just you're walking a fine line, because I mean, all of our schools are Title I schools where parents may not have access to a car. And walking 2 miles to school is a long way.
Especially
And there's
for
quite
small
a few
children.
students in Greenville that have to walk that distance, so you could check on that.
Mr. Auburn,
Yes.
I'll address that part. As far as number of kids in that 2 mile loop, you're probably talking about just under 200 kids overall.
For
That's all counties, or within the county. Now, I can't tell you off the top of my head right now how many stops there are within the 2 mile radius. But please keep in mind when you're considering this, it's one thing when you're thinking about maybe a 10th, 11th, 12th grader walking to school. But don't forget those pre-K, first, second, third, because the sidewalk, as you know, is not much wide off the road than 2 times the width of this. Now, if you go out there in the mornings now, I mean, the deputies that are out on the road don't really want to stand out here, because some of the people that have driver's license probably don't need them. And then, you know, right now you've got fog. A lot of times of the year it's dark.
Raining.
So raining. I mean, Yes, I understand. We're going, under the circumstances, we're eating that one in transportation. You're probably talking, you know, 4 to 5 buses. But at the end of the day, my opinion is we need to eat that, because if you get one of them run over, you're going to pay far more, which is really, side note, far more as we lose a kid. And that's the most important. And as far as town, Greenville, the whole town of Greenville, you pretty much can forget buses over there, other than, you know, way out. Because the whole area within Greenville is within a 2 mile loop of the town.
Right.
No, I agree with you, Mr. Killingsworth. Again, several years ago, when we had to make all of our cuts, we went from the door to door to the centralized pickup, and that saved a great deal of money. And I feel not only would it be danger, I feel that our truancy would go up even higher, because people just wouldn't come to school.
Yes, sir.
And again, if they're not in school, they can't learn, and then they're not going to do good on the FSA. But no, I appreciate this recommendation, and it is something we can look at to make sure that we're not making multiple stops in large areas where kids could gather in a safe place. I don't see the logistics of them walking to Central.
I think y'all already got that side up, Mr. Killenworth, that they meet at certain places like at this.
There are certain areas that we can look at them. There's a program called Versatran that we're looking, and that pretty much maps out where kids are living, for lack of better words, and then you try to maximize your stops and things of that nature. Now, some of them, of course, you know, we're close to houses, because, you know, when the kids live pretty good ways apart, you pick them up along the way.
I had the pleasure, ironically, to ride the school bus last week, and I told Ivan, he said, you wanted to, you know, which route you want? You want an easy route or a rough one? I said, well, go ahead and give me a rough, and we'll see what happens. And so he basically gave me the route that is closest to the school there, and I tell you, my hat goes off to all bus drivers.
Yes, we need a few more drivers.
It was a rough ride. And
He was glad it was under 2 miles.
yeah. And I said that to say that bunch, I would hate to see that bunch walking back and forth to school. I really would. It was, he actually had 2 routes where he took one bunch and then he went back, and I think he had another well, he had 2 routes.
Correct. You run from Central and then come back to the high school.
Yeah. So, but that would be very. I would be very concerned watching those kids on the side of the road, especially that bunch.
Not only that, if you have problems that come up, such as that, kids getting into it with each other and all that, you know, it's bad enough that they do that. But what you may not understand is the next day when you come to school, they're going to bring that back. And when they have an audience, of course, they push them up, and then you end up dealing with other factors along with that. So you're going to have a lot of residual stuff to deal with if we cut the 2 mile out.
Well, the 3 main stops within the 2 mile radius is the Arbors,
That's the one I know.
Southern Villas, and the Hilltop.
That's the one I hit.
And one thing that we failed to mention or discuss, a large portion of those students, not those three that are outside the 2-mile radius, are on the other side of the railroad tracks. So that's another thing we have to contend with as well.
Madam Chair, let me bring a little more
Thank.
clarity to this recommendation. If I remember correctly, the discussion was that we all understood the safety issue with kids who are attending Central School and back and forth that particular route. The issue and the reason we had the language strictly adhered to dealt with rural routes that were designated stops that may have been, the house was further from the road, and the parent would come before the board and request a waiver from the policy, so to speak. And I've sat in many board meetings where that permission was granted at that parent's request. And that's why we stated, create a policy that strictly adheres to.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Killingsworth. Staffing? Yes.
Madam Chair, before we leave that transportation.
Oh, yes.
I think it is something to be said about the wear and tear on our buses and the cost factor as it relates to the whole transportation department. The extracurricular trips, you'll notice, is the third bullet of that particular section. And it dealt with specifically having to use our buses to take care of football teams, basketball teams, whatever, academic trips, so forth. The committee did feel it may be valid for there to be some, at least some discussion and some research relative to having a local provider to provide transportation for those particular trips. That would help in regards to the wear and tear on our buses. They take an enormous beating on these country roads, and the more we have them on things that are not necessarily driving them to and from school, then that adds to the whole idea of wear and tear on our buses. Here again, it's just something that we need to discuss, or should have some discussion about.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
All right.
Let me ask Mr. Copeland, I think Mr. Killingsworth said this involves under 200 students. Could we actually get a number, even though we're all for the safety of the students, but I mean, just out of curiosity, I'd like to know how much this totals. Not now.
I presented that before to the board, the
Yeah,
number
you
of
did.
students.
You did.
that
Do
we
you have it
had.
right now?
Not with me. I did not know I needed to bring
Well,
that.
we don't need it. Yeah, we don't need it right now. Okay.
Off the top of my head, I think that number is 191. But I mean, don't quote me on it. But I know it's a minimum of 190 up to 196.
Yes.
Mr. Killingsworth, do you know how many buses we're running for extracurricular
Why don't
activities?
Would you come up to the front, both of you, please? Because you're not by a microphone back there. And
Extracurricular, as in what? Baseball, football, activity bus. What are we looking at? And the reason why I ask that is there are multiple things that go on. You basically have the activity bus. That's, for lack of better words, is when the kids get through transported to the house.
The activity bus was not part of this particular recommendation. It was pulled out altogether.
But it is one of the buses.
No, I understand that. That's why I'm telling you now that it wasn't one of them, so you don't.
I understand that, but I'm answering her question.
okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna answer all of them. Activity bus is one of them. Okay, you have various ball programs. Right now, you've got baseball, you've got softball, you've got tennis, you've got girls flag football, you've got weightlifting, then track.
And there's a bus for each one of those activities?
No. I'm talking about going to games, that take kids to games. Now, it depends. I would have to look at the schedule. I don't have that off the top of my head. But I mean, I have a Excel spreadsheet that shows when the buses are going away whatever sporting event. Or it could be FFA, it could be a SIG trip. I mean, there's a variety of trips that occur during the year.
Okay, I know
It depends
people
on what
call
time of
me
the year, too.
And they'll say, at 5:30 this afternoon, 2 buses came by my house. What 2 buses would that be? One would be an activity bus, probably. What would the other one be?
It could be an activity. I mean, I can find out. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you that because I don't know where you're talking about, for one. But the ball ones basically pick them up at the school and go to wherever they're playing and come back.
They wouldn't be seen about.
Unless that driver is driving to the house.
They wouldn't be seen about on their country road.
Unless they live where the driver is, that may be taking that crew. That could be. I don't know without knowing the specifics. But that's typically what the buses are used for in the afternoons or evenings or things of that nature. Now, I would recommend, with the number of buses we have and the number of things that go on, that, we don't leave till after 4 o'clock to go to wherever.
Excuse me,
whatever.
I hear talking in the background. They're not going to be able to hear us at home unless we.
Basically, what I'm saying is.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just say after 4 in the future. The reason why is there's only so many buses. What's your priority? Take the kids to the house or get them to the ball game?
You probably.
I mean, at the end of the day, you only got so many buses, so many people, so you have to pick your poison.
You probably short of drivers also.
Could you check with Ivan, other than the activity bus? And I'm not talking about from school to a game and game back to school. That's not an issue. Are there any other buses that go out, like door to door or not?
During the middle of the day?
On a route, like.
During the middle of the day?
Other than after school, that's not taking the children home from school. You know what I'm saying?
You mean later on in the day?
Later in the evening.
Activity bus.
Okay.
And find out if there are any, and what are they, and what
Why?
What are they doing?
I can find that out.
Ms. Williamson, there is a bus that pulls Boys and Girls Club from the Central School because they have middle school students in the whole county.
No. You pick up the always with Boys and Girls Club, there's none.
All right, go ahead.
I'll check on that for you.
We can check on that.
If some of that is going on, is there any way to combine it up and maybe not be as many?
Okay.
That kind of stuff.
I will check on that for you.
Thank you, Mr. Killingsworth.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Staffing. Oh, Mr. Barnes, did you want to say something?
It's okay. So the transportation recommendation, I can speak to that one because that was my recommendation.
Oh, okay.
And what it goes back to is what Mr. Alford mentioned, which is basically historically, when the recession came in about 2008, we reevaluated everything, and busing was one of them. And basically, the 2-mile radius, we found that was not really a beneficial thing because buses were passing by students on the way to school and leaving them standing on the side of the road. It didn't make sense. Mm-hmm. So this really goes back to having centralized locations for pickup points in a safe designated area and doing that as efficiently as possible and trying not to run down as many dirt roads and trails and picking up door to door. And I don't know, it's my understanding, and it could be wrong, but it's my understanding that that process or that implementation has kind of dissolved as money has gotten better since the recession, and it's no longer being adhered to as strictly. So it was just a suggestion to re-examine that, where basically you do have central pickup points. We even had some parents volunteering to build bus shelters and things like that in the morning. I think some of them did around Cherry Lake. So it's just that same kind of mindset. So that's all that was. Hopefully that simplifies it and clarifies it a little bit better to what you were doing.
Thank you.
It
Thank
does.
you.
Thank you.
I could see where that over time has gotten
It has gotten lax, and I think that was the whole drive, is to create a policy. That's why those words create a policy there, so that we can keep reminding ourselves of what we're really doing here with the centralized pickups and so forth. Okay, staffing. Under the staffing heading, any questions? Any further comments?
I agree with what your recommendation was here, that our staffing should be based upon the mission of the district, and it should be student-centered in that if our resources need to go in the classroom, that's where we need to focus on, because that's what's going to make the difference, not what's out of the classroom, but what's in the classroom. And I think we really need to take a hard look at that to see that we're doing that. I mean, I do know that we need people out of the classroom to do certain jobs, but I do think over the years we've gotten top-heavy, and as with anything, I mean, with the decline in enrollment, and we've had steady decline in enrollment, our positions have stayed the same at the top. And that really needs to be looked at because of the decline in enrollment. We have less students. We have less students now than we've ever had, and basically the same amount of administrators that we've had.
Well, and
at
which
the district
goes,
level.
Which goes to the centralized point that we honestly believe that we need to continuously analyze and assess what measurable impacts each one of our positions are making on the whole school system as a whole, and what value do they bring. It shouldn't simply be something because we needed it one year and then we left it there and just let it continue to run. We should continuously analyze those positions. And
in all reality, the sad reality with this, and looking at the potential cuts that we may be facing in the future, in reality, some of the positions that had people retire within the last few years and we filled at that point, if the board would have been prudent, and I blame us because we weren't at that time, we should have looked at it and said, does this really need to be added? At that time, it probably shouldn't have been.
Right.
And that's what we're facing at this point is we have positions that have been continually refilled when people retire. In all reality, we need to take a good look at that. And can we get along without those positions? And if so, then that money for that position, whether it's a grant, whether it's whatever the funding is, should be put in the classroom. We're not going, I mean, we've heard tonight that Central their elementary is in dire need of improvement. You're not going to improve that unless you have people in the classroom.
Exactly.
So I don't know.
And to go along with that, other things that are available, for example, other technologies that may be smarter today that will help assist the teacher in actually doing the work that they may need to do versus actually having per se a person. We've got to think a little bit smarter about how we're doing this whole thing. And so that's why we need to keep a strong check on each position that we have and what value, measurable impact is that position making on our students and on the classroom more so than anything else.
In all reality, what teachers are facing today, pragmatically from students, what they're demonstrating in the classroom with teachers, with behavior, their pragmatics, with their whole being, it has changed drastically within the past 5 years to the point where teacher safety are at issue today, student safety is at issue, and we as a board need to make sure that we're putting people in there to help teachers, whether it be aides, whether it be additional teachers in there. I mean, again, I don't know how some of the teachers are doing it, to be quite frank with you, just from the safety aspect of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, Ms. Dow. Any other on staffing?
I think we've
Madam
covered
Chair, move forward,
if you will.
Administrative costs, you can see again that here again, we tried to word these in such a way that they would be simplistic as far as getting the measurable point of each one of the recommendations. I do want to say, when you look at that first bullet, when it talks about establish a 3-year plan that gets our administrative costs comparable to other districts of our size, the only caveat I would make with that is that we have to be careful that we're doing apples to apples versus apples to oranges when we're assessing what other districts may be doing and how they may be doing it. Because too often, when you just look at the code numbers themselves, the numbers don't necessarily reveal all of the work detail that goes along with that. So when you're thinking in terms of that plan, that 3-year plan of how to make administrative costs comparable to other districts our size and pretty much without status, that's a very important aspect that should not be overlooked. should not be overlooked. And we felt very strongly about that. We felt very strongly about there being a district office staff allocation manual. You have it for the schools on both the school site administrative side as well as teachers and support persons, but you do not have it one as it relates to the district office level staff. And so we felt very strongly that if we're going to move towards actually taking care of our positions and making sure our positions are in line with what our student population is and what our needs are, we need to make sure that we have a staffing allocation plan for district level administrators and or staff at the district level.
Let me ask Dr. Pickles, do you have any recommendations on that?
I brought the same district plans that you have from before, and we can look at that when I think it's 2.6, 2.5 that we'll get down to it.
Okay, and you all will have to come up with the formula to actually drive that particular manual, but we think it's absolutely critical that you do that, because here again, that would be one of the ways, Mr. Alfred, that you would keep yourself from getting top heavy. You would keep yourself from getting overexpended within administration at the district level or any other positional wise at the district level, whether they be teachers who are on special assignment at the district level or whether they be support persons at the district level.
The sad thing about it is what we've seen, there's very few have for the district office. I mean, very few districts are having plans. I think it's an excellent idea. It's imperative we have it, but and what we've looked through is we're not seeing them there. The district office.
I think there was one, if I remember correctly, I think I was part of a conversation where Brevard County was doing something similar to that as how they assign school levels.
Brevard has a very comprehensive plan, but I didn't see directors, and maybe we just overlooked them. I didn't see.
No, I don't think it was really there. I think the beginnings of what could possibly be is there.
No, Brevard County has a very comprehensive.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I would think that it just seems, I know that there's a lot of nuances when we start looking at counties of similar size, and they have less than we do, and we have more than they do in some places, and they have more than we do in some places, and we have less than they do in some places. But I think it's critical that the committee felt, but the committee felt that it would be critical that you all do all within your power to actually do that. Because when we talk about top heavy, when we talk about, and I've heard that more times than a little since January, we're top heavy. And so we have to really figure out how to do that. Understanding the less people you have, the more responsibilities are going to have to be parsed between those few people. And so therefore, that's a consideration as well. But here again, I think that should not preclude us from having some kind of way of knowing that there is some system, there's some reason, some rhyme to why we have these many people at this
It should be
office.
driven by numbers, where it's very driven by numbers, and it's something you can go to where it's not just, I think we need this.
Exactly.
Because we could think a lot of things, but we need data there proven that this is based on these numbers. This is what it generates.
I think the only way to operate today is by data-driven research and usage. And so then when you talk about the analyzed costs and benefits of relocating the administrative offices to the central school, here again, we went into no detail about how you should do that, but the board certainly should give due consideration to that and summarize all of the things that go into that particular decision. Cost of actually having to make the transfer, cost once the transfer is made, cost to sustain that, and having the appropriate room necessary to allocate for administrative offices. And, I think that what you've heard already is that is something that's doable. It is a possibility to have it done, but it's something that the board has to have the will to actually follow through and make sure that you get all the analysis done that you would need to make that decision.
Any further questions?
Okay, moving on, Madam Chair. Okay, under the allocation of resources, here again, this is one that we really believe that it was worth stressing again, even though we had covered it in some of the other areas, specifically addressing each one of those previous bullets. But we felt that we should create and adopt and enforce the use of specific processes and formula for allocating resources, Mr. Alfred, which is what we just finished talking about relative to administrative level, district level administrators. There ought to be something it ought to have some data behind it. It ought to have some numbers behind it and not just something you pull out of the air or, maybe in good times when everything is going good, you say, okay, we want to add this person as a luxury. But then when you get in tough times, sometimes we don't understand that maybe we need to decrease, and that person who came on as a luxury stays on as a luxury. Not that anybody's on as a luxury, but I'm just using that as a hypothetical so that we can make sure that we understand. The data-driven research, the data-driven decisions are really the way that this board should be making its decisions about allocation of resources, whether it be curriculum, whether it be staffing, whether it be transportation, whatever the means are, whatever the needs are, it should all be data driven. And we're at a point in society where you can find a lot of data to help support the things that you need to do. You just have to have somebody who's going to research it and who's going to drill down deep enough so that you can find out if it's able to necessitate the needs that we have.
Now, we have that for the maintenance department.
Yeah.
As far as, I've seen that and I've worked with that. So.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So there is some hint of it going on.
There's a hint of it going on. Yes.
Yeah. And so what probably needs to be done is there needs to be some expansion on that. Mm-hmm. And I've heard several times since January that a school needs to be able to operate within the amount of money that it generates. Okay, here again, that's covered under that allocation of resources. And so rather than just having it change at the whim of anybody, the board needs to think realistically about having a policy and adopt a plan that will cover that particular area so that, when we get our request for whatever, you can revert back to that plan and see if it's necessary to amend the plan or if it's necessary to just simply say no. So, that's the whole idea, I think, that we've got to do a better job at making sure that our resources are allocated where we really need them.
Okay. Yeah. So, under allocation of resources, let me back up. Mr. Copeland is exactly right. Over the last couple of years, the district has completely turned around its finances. It was running a deficit for about 3 or 4 years prior to Ms. Pickles coming in, and then the last couple of years they've now been operating at a surplus until this year, where forecasting, just missing a forecast, caused the situation in January. I go back. The reason why I say all this is because I know from when I was here, and I know from talking to Mr. Stallnaker and Mr. Copeland, that you guys have all of those plans in place. You guys have all those documents in place. Now it's just a matter of working through those, and you guys have actually illustrated that, and also I've been watching the last few board meetings, and I'm very hopeful and very pleased with the fact that you guys have been working through attrition and recognizing that summer is a chance to recalibrate and rebalance now that you know that you're going to make it to the end of the year. So I think you're going through all of this with a very methodical process, and you guys are going through it in a way that is exactly like what the committee was asking for. And again, when we started this is about mid-February, I think, when we started talking about this. So a lot of the things that you guys have done over the last few weeks, or maybe mid-March, maybe early March, but you guys have been going through all of this the last few meetings and actually been doing everything that we're suggesting. So the reason I bring all that up is because you guys actually have a very good plan and a very good district and are moving in the right direction, in my opinion, just from my experience, and I think just seeing what's going on in the illustration that Mr. Copeland presented earlier. So when it comes back to allocation of resources, transportation, all of these things, you guys have plans in place. I think you guys are fine-tuning those plans. I think all of those things are going to make progress for you and move you in the right direction. I think the biggest thing is, and it's complicated with charter schools in the mix, but it's just to make sure that your projections are good and solid. And that's the biggest, and that's just that's a challenge, and that's something that takes a lot of time and due diligence. And I will say this, and I said this during our committee meeting: the Department of Education's models, you always have to adjust off of them. They've never been accurate for our county. Whatever the nuances are in our county, they've just never been good. And I know that from talking to Robin and Walter, that they've been doing that. They've adjusted this year, and so anyway, I say all that because I want y'all to have confidence in what they're doing. Based on my experience and what I've seen, I think they've done a tremendous job moving y'all forward. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Copeland.
Yeah. Andy, or Mr. Barnes has been a great deal of help to me as far as being available.
No.
That's not working, Walter.
I was going to say, Andy Barnes has been a great deal of help to me. I need to utilize him more. When I was pointing out that chart where we had a little bit of a bump the last 2 years, we have done nothing. I mean, there's a lot of nuances every year. Ray was dealing with a construction project that I'm not dealing with, so there's a lot of moving parts, and by no means is it fixed. But I just wanted to say thanks, and I'll continue to bother you.
Well, and again, the idea is that even if you are doing it, and we see that there are some things that you're moving in the right direction on.
I was going to say, I want to correct myself, because I mentioned the maintenance, but also we have the staffing allocation plan. In other words, there's plans out there. So
you just have to adhere to them.
Well, hopefully we are adhering to them.
With the nuances that Mr. Copeland mentioned, because any day you could have a nuance that was different from something you did previous,
right,
which means you will have to make the necessary adjustments.
Well, we're working very carefully and cautiously. I think since January we've become more cautious, and we'll continue to be.
Again, and I think it's very important that the board think real seriously about this, because the automatic step, and I'll use that for an example, the automatic step of the $260,000 roughly that it will cost if you included everybody in it, $200,000 roughly from the general fund. Anytime that becomes a critical point in whether we stay afloat or whether we go under, something is not aligning the way it ought to. Out of a almost $20 million budget, and I was looking over some documents for previous years, and I see that the total monies that have come into Madison far exceeds what we see on the FEFP printout, because there was one year we were up to as much as $28 million through all of the sources that came in. And so here again, those are good numbers, but we've got to utilize them in such a way that $260,000 will not break us, will not put us in a crunch line. I don't care if you've got $50 million and $260,000 will put you in the crunch line. Something is going on amidst there. Okay, it shouldn't be that tight. The budget really shouldn't be that tight.
And like Mr. Copeland says, we need to tighten our belt.
Yeah. So it's some corrective action that needs to be continued to take. You need to take some corrective action somewhere in order that we don't find ourselves streamlined like that. When you lose $1 million, that's a big number, and so you got to make the projections in such a way that And I think that Andy, I appreciate you saying that about the DOE software relative to that. But Madison County isn't the only one that got hit. Almost all of the counties all over the state got hit during that October to December FTE count, third calc. So we weren't the only ones, but because we were where we were, then that's why it impacted us like we did. All right, and then the VPK, the committee. Again, we recognize the value of having a full day of VPK, but again, we were charged with bringing you recommendations of how we could reduce costs, and so this is why that particular recommendation came forth, that we would venture back to a half day of VPK that the state actually funds us for, and that the board would look at other ways of maybe getting the money for the additional hours. And I know that we at one point was trying to get parents to pay for it, and then you had problems with getting parents to pay for it. And then there are other programs like Head Start and so forth that took up the various programs, undertook the additional half day for VPK. But here again, that's a recommendation from us because we were looking for cost cut measures. We certainly recognize the value of a pre-K or having a full day school experience.
But we're only funded on a half a day, though.
But we only fund it on a half day. And that's where the rubber meets the road at, you know. The board can choose to continue to eat it as we have done in the past. But there again, when you're doing your budget structuring and building your budget, we really need to take all those things into consideration, okay? Because you're only going to get so much money in. And once that money comes in, it's in, you know. And so you have to parse it out the best way that you think that you can in order that we may have a quality educational system. Any questions in that regard? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate it.
All right. To the committee members, Madam Chair, if I may take a moment of personal privilege.
Yes.
To Mr. Barnes and to all of the other committee members who are here, certainly I'm gracious and thankful that they came to share with you all whatever you all needed to have, questions you need to have answered relative to this report. They did work hard. We had 3 meetings, and it was 6 or 7 weeks that we actually worked through this process. And they were very cooperative, and they worked hard to make sure that we got where we got.
And we appreciate. Could you recognize them? Would you like to recognize them?
Please stand.
But in the micro.
All right. Yeah. All committee members, please stand. Okay. And there's some that are not here. But every one of our recommendations were sincere.
Yeah.
Every one of our recommendations was the outcome of a holistic committee. Okay, not just any individuals. It was an outcome of a holistic committee. Okay. So,
thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Sure. Yes.
I'd like to add a little gender diversity to this presentation. I do reflective journaling from every experience, and I just like to share my experience as a part of that committee. Because I'm hoping that it's for the good of the order and might be beneficial for the board members and the superintendent in your working relationship. I have to say that since January, you all have given us whiplash. In less than 3 months, the financial pendulum has swung from a state of financial urgency. According to last meeting, we're now okay. You assembled this committee, and our charge was to look at long-range financial planning. You provided us with a notebook with all kinds of data on FTE, student head count since 2004, and projected enrollment for 2019-2020. You gave us the fiscal study that was requested from the superintendent, and we discussed comparative data from other districts at length. I can honestly say, as a member of the committee, that we understood our charge, and we took that charge seriously and responsibly. Some of us had never met before. Some came to the table with hidden agendas. Some came with prepared agendas already printed out. Some simply came because they were asked and were genuinely interested in trying to help do the best for our children. I mention this because as a group who had never worked together before, I think we accomplished so much in 12 to 15 hours, and we really would appreciate the board and the superintendent giving our recommendations serious consideration and discussion. We were civil. We were respectful of each other, and we compromised. We often reminded each other calmly of why we were there. Long-range planning to avoid the January fiasco era happening again, and to make sound fiscal option recommendations for the superintendent and board to consider in hopes of long-range fiscal sustainability. I said all that to say this. If a committee of people who are not used to working together can accomplish what was presented to you tonight and before tonight, I certainly pray for and hope that this board keeps, and the superintendent keeps our committee's work in mind and our ability to work together for the good of our children, because that is our priority. And if it's not, you're in the wrong place. I'd just like to say thank you again for the opportunity to serve on that committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hubbard. 2.4, FADS, Fiscal Study and ESE Study. Dr. Pickles?
If you'll pull up the fiscal study, there are a few things I want to point out. On page 21, that one, page 21. As I tried to point out in the couple meetings ago, the instructional and personnel are our teachers, the instructional specialists are some of our ESE. Let's go back and look down at my list. Hold on just a second. Media specialists, the coaches, CTE, adult ed, our counselors, our the 11, go to the managers, if you'll scroll down. The managers, that's going to be anything from our cafeteria managers, our head custodians, our supervisors, anything like that, those particular levels. So that's the reason we have 11. Our 110, our ESP, which has been, or 136 of our full-time, that's going to be our pairs. All of our employees are classified employees. So they're our ESP are non-instructional. So they're going to be our clerical, our bus drivers, our regular custodians, our skilled craft workers, so our maintenance folks. Those are all of those employees. So whether they're full-time, part-time, our lunchroom workers, that's all of those people. So that's where they're going to be categorized in the 110 and the 26. So I needed to point those things out. It's how they're reported.
But even with how they're reported, we still have a substantial more than Dixie, Calhoun, and Gilchrist.
I was thinking they compare to us with those counties.
Right. So I mean, no matter how it's reported, we're still they're in the 90s and we're at 136 for total employees. And back to the managers, I mean, we have 11 and Dixie County has 0. Calhoun has 2 and Gilchrist has 2. If that's the case, then we need to see how they're operating without the managers.
Evidently, they're doing
it's the classification, and that's what you have to look at. So it's not just the number; it's the job classification. So that's what you have to go back and look at.
But what I'm saying is, even with the classification, they're still, if they are working, then what are they classified as?
They may be classified something different, and I would have to contact them to find out.
Even if we don't look at that, if you look at the total number, we're still significantly above the same size districts that are comparable.
Okay, we have quite a few paras in our district, and actually our number should come up even more now because we do have more paras. So if you want to cut our largest number, the 136, where there's 92 in Dixie, 98 in Calhoun, and then Gilchrist, you're probably going to be cutting paras.
I don't want to cut anything out of the classroom.
But that's
I
what
don't
I'm
either.
saying, the educational support personnel, that's that largest, and they're gonna be classified down there based on the headings from DOE. So that was one of the things I wanted to point out on this study.
Well, reading over this quite a few times, I'm getting I know that the impression I'm getting, we have too many people working here. And, I mean, that's their opinion. This is a study that was done, that we have too many people.
And you have to go back to see how they're classified and what's reported. And this was from 2 years ago. Ms. Hill?
I just want to point out that part of what you're seeing too is those other school districts did not have a school in need of improvement. They did not have a SIG grant. And so when you're looking at our educational support personnel, one of the reasons why our numbers were so high 2 years ago was because we had the SIG grant and we were able to fund more of those paraprofessionals. The number of paraprofessionals this year dropped due to the fact that we could not pay for them out of the SIG grant. And so you have to kind of take those things into consideration too. Those numbers are not the same today that they were a couple of years ago.
Thank you, Mrs. Hill.
Our 14 administrative, that's classified as coordinators. And we have, and executive directors, we have 7 total. Supervisors are classified down under the managers. We have 3 supervisors, and then the principals come under instructional personnel.
So you, okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, you said I have coordinators by the managers. I had written coordinators. But you say they're up at
coordinators are under administrator. Okay. Supervisors are under managers. I have it written in another document of where they come from. Managers are like your cafeteria managers,
right?
Head custodians, supervisors, those type people.
Right. Well, let me ask your opinion, your recommendation. When you look at this whole thing, does something say to you, oh, we've got too many people there, we should address that?
Knowing where certain people are classified now, and knowing how we're trying to put more paras in, and knowing where our paras fall, that's the reason I see that number is so high.
Well, I'm all for the paras being in the class. The teachers need, though, a good para for sure.
Knowing our administrative, that number will be less because we do not have 14 administrators.
Did we have 14 2 years ago?
We may have, because we had some of the extra SIG.
But the SIG should only been one administrator, shouldn't it?
I think there were 2. I think there were 2 technically classified under there.
Any questions for Dr. Pickles on this?
I just would like to know your recommendation on this. Are you recommending that we're okay with our administrative and teachers? What's your recommendation?
We have less of these administrators and employees now.
But based upon we're needing to cut $130,000 to come to the 3.5, what is your recommendation on these?
I'm going through the recommendations of it. We do it through attrition, not trying to do a mass. And as somebody leaves, we cut the position, which is what we've been doing.
But what if they don't leave? I mean, what if there's a position that doesn't leave, that it's like a teaching position that has to be refilled? what do we do then? I don't know, as a board, we can sit here and hope that people are going to leave where we can say, oh, we're going to get money from that.
Well, and talking to Mr. Copeland, to get the amount of money, that's what I needed to also know. I needed to know where, as a board, you wanted to be. What was the 5% of figure? What was that dollar figure? 5%. To get the 5%. Is it going to be 350, 400,000? Say 300,000. If it was going to be 200,000 to get the 4%, so to get the 5%, 275, 300,000. Because that's one thing this board has never said, what percentage they wanted to get to. That you just kept coming up with figures, and it's like, what percentage were you wanting to get to?
We want to get to 5%, because that's what we said we wanted to get to.
And then in what time frame?
Well, let's say a year. Maybe can we do it in a year? We're going to have to make some drastic decisions.
By June 30th of 21.
Well, that would be a year from now. Would be 20.
Okay, I thought we wanted to get to 4% by the end of 20.
Did you say a year you wanted to be in 4%? Was that a year? Is that what you said?
4%. And then the following 5.
So that would be 5% by the end of 21.
Okay. Which I know is permissible, but considering what we've been through since January, I don't feel good where we are right now. I just don't. I'm not comfortable with it.
In case something were to happen where there's a shortfall, where we're not going to be back in the same boat of being back below the 3%.
Right. Anything can happen. Right. There could be air conditioners go with Central or the others. You don't know what's going to happen around the corner.
Well, as Mr. Copeland and I have talked, you're not going to make the numbers work. There's no way to do that unless making massive cuts, and you cannot do that with just people. We can save money as people leave, yes.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying we can't make cuts with people? What did you
not
say that again?
Not massive cuts, not to try to get to 5%.
No.
Immediately,
not massive, but good cuts.
Mm-hmm.
Did this is for Mr. Copeland? What we had requested concerning what the cuts were, what it would bring the fund balance up with the cuts that we had proposed earlier. Will you have that by the 12th?
Yes, I can forward that to you. I've worked up a rough estimate of that. The thing is, we're in a situation, we've got to manage by what we need and be lean and mean, but we're also in a tight position with our general fund balance, so we have to manage by what affects that also. And with some of those positions, and I had it recapped somewhat, and I will get it back together. It's actually with the terminal pay that was projected, and taking some of the folks that were being able to be funded through a grant, changing the roles was actually kicking them back into the general fund balance. So it was level, and maybe worse than that with the terminal pay. The terminal pay has to be paid through the general fund. But let me revisit that, Mr. Alford, and get that back to you. But yes, I will have it to you before the 12th. And we are, keep in mind, where we looked at these projected position changes with the savings number we were projecting, Mr. Stallnacker and I and Ms. Hill and the other folks here, I still need to revisit our funding report from our latest payroll. We try to do that periodically, and we try to be spot on. But if there's anything else that jumps out, we'll recast our numbers as we identify those. And so we're, again, trying to find everything we can, and we will communicate as we move forward.
Let me ask you a question. This $602,000 you talked about, was that something for this coming year you're talking about?
That was projected for the coming year, the 2019-20 year.
Okay, plus the $120,000.
That was the number we had, right, to give us the bump based on today's figures that we need.
The $75,000. I've got three figures down here.
Right.
I'm not sure what the $75,000 was for. That was mentioned.
That was to get you to 4%.
That was okay. All of this would get us to 4% right here. Okay, Dr. Pickles.
So one of the things we've never done is actually gone through every recommendation. And we've done some of these things. We're not hiring. We're trying to, unless it's a critical need, like we needed a bus driver.
Okay, did you go over the ESE report?
No. Going through some of these.
Okay.
Although we're not spending, so therefore there's no new monies, other than we have to have a bus driver. We need bus drivers as it is. We have been trying to determine what position, so when somebody leaves, do we need that position? Do we have to have it? Who can pick up the duties, things like that. So a lot of these recommendations that we went through, I've got them all typed out that we will go through every one of these. So as somebody leaves, we eliminate that position, we take it off. And so that's a cost savings for the remainder of the year, and then we don't see that we have to fill it. So tried several times, and it's the next item to review the staffing manual. We will try to go ahead and revisit that tonight to get that on here. So that was one of the other suggestions. We have got to make sure we have it across the board so that we are going through it, so we have it to follow for next year. We've got to get it updated. That was one of the things we had started on. So the other was closing Greenville. That was, Mr. Copeland, how much was the savings? What's that going to be? Yes. With our overhead.
The overhead? I think the maintenance overhead was around, give me just a second, 80 something.
That payroll would shift to Central because, as you are aware, there are vacancies. Ms. Dixon collapsed the classes, but we have those vacancies, so none of the teachers would lose their job. But where we have 27 in one class or two classes, 25, I believe, in some classes, we could bring those classes back down. That was a motion made back in January. The board never acted on it. It died.
I have a question concerning that. So you're saying that you're recommending the closure of Greenville for added savings, but my question to you is, by doing that, will that also in turn force us to close Lee and Pinetta? Because I don't know how we can close Greenville and leave open Lee and Pinetta. So if you're saying that you're recommending to close Greenville to save money, in turn, would we have to close Lee and Pinetta too?
Well, when you look at your capacity, yes. When your capacity is at 1625 and we are down below 1,000, there is room. But that was back in January. That was not my recommendation.
What is your recommendation now?
To be honest, it's to, when you're looking at a cost-saving measure, it is to close the schools, the outlying schools. And especially, it's very alarming when you sit with the chancellor and Ms. Messina, and they both say you cannot operate a school with less than 200 to 250 children. It is not fiscally responsible and capable of doing it.
But my question for the whole board is, I believe that we owe the students of that school in this community the opportunity for us to try to operate it within this budget. Right. We have not tried. We are doing this
now,
to we're doing this as a way to cut without really addressing that we're overstaffed in places.
And I've been told that they've actually had less students in the past. Greenville's had less students than they have right now. And we were in very fiscally in great shape at the time.
I think, Mr. Copeland, have you ever looked at how much the district as a whole eat and in-kind, as far as in-kind? In-kind funding, or, you know, like when we partner with an agency and we eat costs in certain areas, that costs us as a district. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
All right. So for different agencies that we're partnered with, several of them, we eat a lot of costs in in-kind donations. You agree?
I do agree. Somewhat, yes.
Okay. Have you ever have we ever thought about running a report of all in-kind district-wide and see what those numbers are and what type of services that we are rendering that in-kind to, and see if we can possibly get with those agencies to see if they can work with us some in some of those areas?
I have not done that. That's a very good. Now we did.
I mean, you handle the numbers. You work with
right.
the numbers every day. But I've seen some of the numbers, and it's a lot.
What agencies are you referring to?
No, I'm just saying.
I mean, it's just some like. Is it like Boys and Girls Club? Or?
No, I mean like. Yeah, for example, the Boys and Girls Club.
Okay.
And so I would be interested in seeing all of the numbers of all of the in-kind that services that we provide, and see if those are some areas that we can possibly get with those agencies and see if they are. We're in a tight situation. You would think that they would be willing to work with us.
Right.
In some regard.
Well, when we met with the leadership from the DOE a couple of weeks ago, they were on the same page as you are with anything. You know, we want to be good stewards of our neighbors here. We work well with the charter schools and this and that, but we can't. You're right. We're not in the position to where we can be donating much. A lot of times, we had a discussion today about a charter school issue with the administrators. A lot of times there's things on the other side that there is a give and take of sorts, and but I will work to do that. It's important. I'm kind of like a man with a hammer right now, and everything's a nail, and so I will help move on that, and that's a good point.
I'd like to go back to Dr. Pickle's recommendation of closing all 3 small schools down. I think that's really disrespecting our long-range planning committee that works so diligently. They understand the community. I understand the community. I know the schools. These are successful schools. They're
and communities.
And they're community schools. The parents buy into it, which we've had a problem with Central. I know the teachers are doing everything they can over there. We have a problem with Central. But again, the long-range planning committee put a lot of thought into it and came up with their recommendations, and I don't think we should cast them aside.
And along those lines, Madam Chair, when the issue surfaced, I try to be, I want to, as a board member, I want to be as effective as I can. And so I sought out some of the stakeholders over in Greenville, and I talked with some of the leaders in the community, and basically, focusing on Greenville at this time would be a bad thing. at this time. The timing is off right now. And the reason why I said that, I say that because right now Greenville in particular is thriving. They're thriving. And so you don't want to, you know, when they're, as they're thriving, this is not a time to knock off the momentum or anything. I spoke with the town manager. He's here present today. And I asked him, I said, man, I hear and see that y'all are doing big things and and everything, you're on the up and up. What are some of the things that y'all have accomplished in the last year or so? And basically, he basically jotted them down for me. And Greenville has received a $1 million grant from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, as you know, for improvements at the Greenville Elementary School. All right, completion of those improvements is scheduled within the next 30 days. And then the town of Greenville is also partnering with Twin Oaks to create over 170 jobs throughout Madison County and beyond. These jobs are related to a new mattress manufacturing plant and 100 foster children. And then they are also creating, as you all may know, a grocery store, which will include a deli, pharmacy, a clinic, and also the senior citizen and youth facility, just to name a few. And he had more, and they're doing more, a whole lot more. But I said that to say this: the timing is off. The timing is off for messing or focusing on closing the schools over in Greenville. The school ties in tremendously with what they have going on right now, and that will impact that community greatly.
Well, thank you for your research. I'd like to add, it is one of our higher performing schools.
I'd like to add to what Mr. Daniels said. We're here about the financial needs and the issues. That's our responsibility. But looking at our outline schools, this is our A and B schools. They're having academic success, and we want to close those.
I don't think the state closes high-performing schools.
I'm not ready to do that.
Until our last meeting with the chancellor, it has never been my desire to close all three schools until they were saying.
I don't want to close any of them.
Excuse me?
They're all
until
succeeding.
They said that you cannot fiscally operate a school with less than 200 and 250 kids. Ms. Gibson heard that.
I was there, but we've been operating the schools, though. This has been going on for years. They haven't had, I don't know if they've ever had more than 250.
Greenville was below 200 when we had a fund balance of 10%.
So, I mean, it's been done.
I mean, you can do it, but you can't be wasting in other places.
No.
And the children deserve that opportunity to be at a
right.
school.
I don't know if Greenville Elementary's ever had more than 250. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, it's been, like you said, your fund balance was 10%, and Greenville had less than 200. Right?
True.
Yeah. So we've got to work very smarter than what we've been working, obviously.
Well, again, I go back to, I'm afraid that all the schools have a lot to offer. They offer it in the community. They do a lot of good things there, and they are our A and B schools. And again, I mean, they're our storefronts, and the students are our customers, and it doesn't make sense closing good schools down to send them into Central, where in all reality of it, the moment those schools close down, it will become a charter, and we will lose those kids and some.
I think it was just said, I don't know if I heard over at Legislative Days, that their charter's requesting $3 million or $3 billion. In other words, they're in financial difficulty. So they would love to come over here and open up some schools.
I mean, the moment that ball starts to roll, they will be here asking us for the keys to the building, whether we want to admit that, and they're going to go K through 8. And at that point, the students at Central are going to go out there. If Creative Arts has over 100 on a waiting list, those kids are going to go somewhere that are in the public school right now. That's the reality of it. So again, I feel that we need to try to operate our outlying schools to the best of their ability, our ability, to keep them solvent. If not, you are starting a snowball that we will not be able to stop. We will not be able to stop, and we might as well say the district needs to be turned over to charter, because it will be. Because if Lee, Pinetta, and Greenville go, Central will be the next. And at that point, I don't know how many employees will be here, because they'll be all charter employees. Am I right or wrong about that, Dr. Pickles?
Well, when you go to close a school, you don't just have it as surplus, you make arrangements for that school. And you can look at Hamilton. They sent one and they entered into a partnership with the town of Jasper. There's other things they did with their buildings.
But in my opinion,
there are things you could do with our buildings.
In my opinion, our buildings are a lot newer
yes.
and nicer than what was in Hamilton County. And I am not giving any more property away in this district. We've been burned in the past. Years ago, we've given stuff away, and it's been sold after we gave it away, thinking that, oh, they're going to do something nice with it. They sold it. We've given it to places. They've given it to other people. Again, we have been burnt time after time of giving property away. As a board member, I'm not giving any property away. If we close down a school, then we need to be prepared to hand the keys over to a charter company.
I'm not prepared to do it.
I'm not prepared to do that either. Am I saying that it could happen? Absolutely, it could happen. But at that point, I think we need to do all as a board we can do to keep the schools open. And if it happens, then we know that we've done all we can. That should not be our first step, is to hand them the keys to the building.
Okay. Dr. Pickles?
Well, you asked for the SE study, and you have your final study up there. I have asked Mr. McDowell to send some other job descriptions, because that was one of the recommendations, was to have new job descriptions. And I thought it would also, since our neighboring counties, since I know that Mr. Alford refers to Taylor County quite often, and then Ms. Williamson also called Swanee County.
I call Calhoun, Dixie, Swanee, Taylor.
I know you mentioned Swanee County, so it's at least that we should contact the neighboring counties and get their job descriptions for their staffing specialists, to update our staffing specialist job descriptions. But the report is there. You asked for the report. The final report is updated.
Thank you for that. 2.5, any more questions? Staffing allocation manual?
I would like to attempt to try to go through this staffing allocation manual.
You gotta make sure I'm saying the same thing you are, so I can make any edits.
I guess we'll start here. This is where we had last started working. For the meeting on the 15th, does the board want to add the recommendation to vote on the school reconfiguration?
What now?
Explain that, please.
For the meeting on the 15th, does the board want to vote on school reconfiguration?
You mean closing schools?
What you were deciding with our capacity, because that's gonna change some of this.
When you say reconfiguration, what's your definition of that?
Well, you had discussed making all the outlying schools or all the schools pre-K to 6 and then the high school 7-8.
Don't we need to find out from DOE first if they will let us do that before we vote on that?
Is it up to us? I thought we had to go to the DOE and all that too.
You're gonna have to make the decision, do you want
To
then
pursue
we will,
it.
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would like for us to have a vote to talk about it, to pursue it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, with this, if it's based upon the numbers, then the numbers would drive what it would be. If it's over 150 kids, then that would drive your staffing. I mean, it would drive based on the numbers, no matter if we do the reconfiguration or not.
Do you want pre-K to 6 or do you just want K to 6 at your outlying schools?
What's the pleasure of the board?
There's not enough capacity at Pinetta.
Where would the pre-K
They would go to
They'd
Central?
have to go to Central.
That would make room at Pinetta, actually. And Lee, if they needed it.
We need to, before we decide that, I think we need to see how many rooms are going to be needed at Pinetta or Lee before and how much capacity they have. We're going off of hearing we need to see the exact rooms.
Right.
Before we make that decision.
How many students, too?
Right.
This is rolling the numbers up, though.
I would think that we would keep pre-K at those schools if there's room to have pre-K at
If
those
there's
schools.
room, but still allow the 6th graders to go back to the schools. So it could
You're
be.
not allowing them to go back, you're just allowing them to stay.
To stay, right, to stay.
And the kindergartners come in. And if any school has room for pre-K, then
they can.
pre-K would stay there too. I mean, Lee, a couple of years ago, had so many pre-K, they had 2 pre-Ks. Now they're back to 1 pre-K, whatever you have room for.
And I wouldn't think they'd all have to be the same. Each school wouldn't have to be the same. In other words,
I think there would be room for the pre-K to be there, but that would be something to look at.
Pinetta is going to be your problem.
Yeah, that's.
Because moving their 5th grade up, they would be at roughly 240. And they're only at 224.
And that's with pre-K being there, with the same number of pre-Kers they have now?
That's just kindergarten through 6.
How many kids are there now?
Pinetta.
Did you say 240?
Roughly about 240. They each have one pre-K of 18. Well, not Greenville. Pinetta and Lee each have 18 in their pre-K. I guess we will have to wait on this and find out more definite on
Okay, well, you got that, Robin?
the DOE.
What do you, how many are there totally right now?
Total, counting pre-K, counting everybody, how many children are?
212 are at Pinetta.
212. So if you had the same size pre-K class next year that you have this year, all you're gonna be adding is a class of kindergartners. Because everybody else is gonna be rolling up a grade. And and they just have one kindergarten class?
No, they've got two.
Two? So that could be a capacity of 36.
But they have 2 kindergarten now? I mean,
Yes, they've got two.
that's not gonna predict, well, yeah,
They're not big classes, but they're two.
So that'd be 248, and what's the capacity of the school?
224. Or wait, excuse me, which school? Pinetta?
Pinetta.
224.
Is the capacity? So at their 212 now, they are at capacity, then why are we saying that they're not maintaining them their self? They're at their capacity?
I never said they weren't. I said they would be over capacity.
But K through 6 would be 240, you said, so that would be over capacity.
Yeah, they'll be over capacity.
Is that allowable, or
Trying to fit them somewhere.
trying to put them in a?
Not having the space.
Yeah.
It's a matter of what room you're gonna put them in.
Right.
Not to put a whole nother class, that's the problem. All right, I guess we're gonna have to wait on this and decide what DOE tells us first, and, because that's gonna change all of this.
how is it will change, I mean,
Well, I mean, it's gonna change the high school, it's gonna change whether they're pre-K to 5, pre-K to 6. And then we have a whole separate one for the central.
I mean, we need, I guess the first step, we need guidance from DOE whether we're gonna be allowed to do this. I mean, that's the first, and I would like for it explained in that we're trying to, financially run our district the most efficient way we can. And I know when we asked at an earlier time when Central was, in turnaround and we were trying to move it out, that's a whole different reason, concerning student achievement versus finances. This is due to a financial issue, trying to be as efficient as we can with the schools.
As it was explained to Ms. Gibson and myself, actually to all of us, they look at why you're doing it. Whether you're doing it for school grade purposes, whether you're doing it, they also will look at how severely under capacity this school is. I will reach back out and explain why it's being done. But they take into account all of it. So we'll just have to wait on this.
We'll wait
for the
on
first
that.
Maybe
Okay.
workshop.
All right, 2.6, recommendations.
We'll just have to wait on these.
Wait on all this?
Yes.
Okay. Superintendent's remarks?
There are two bus trips. Creative Arts is requested to use our buses on the 12th for Ecology Day. And then there's a field trip date for the high school to go to Panacea. And the date changes to the 15th, so I just need to advise you of it.
Okay, thank you. Board member remarks. Ms. Williamson? Ms. Bell? Mr. Alford?
Yes, ma'am. I just want to apologize to you, Ms. Bell. If ever I've cut you off, that was not my intent. I would hope that you also, in the future, would be conscious of your actions and how you address individuals.
Rip? Mr. Daniels?
I would take the time to recognize the Long Range Committee. I know you've already been recognized, but I was actually looking over your recommendations and how the words were crafted and just the whole 9 yards, man. Y'all should be working for some big time firms somewhere. So I wanted to commend you and to thank you for taking on this challenge.
I'd like. Oh, were you finished? Okay. All right. I wanted the board members and the audience, if you'll remember, beginning Memorial Day to July 4th, the flags that are around the courthouse. It says this was done by the American Legion, Post 224 in Cherry Lake. The flags will be put up around the courthouse from Memorial Day to July 4th. If you'd like to sponsor or receive the flag, then you will also receive the flag, along with a certificate of appreciation from the American Legion. The sponsorship is only $50 and is tax deductible. We've got forms right here. If you're interested in that, all the board members and I think all the staff have these in your box. So it's a nice flag, and they'll put your name on a little marquee there. And I'd like to encourage anyone from the audience who would like to do this. Thank you. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Alford, second by Mr. Daniels. All in favor? Opposed?
Are we going to do the agenda review for next?
We already did that.